Okay,
Cool.
let's take some calls.
Yeah, let's get to some calls. We got Kyle in Georgetown. How are you?
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, I'm a longtime fan of the show. It's the first time I've ever called in.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I had a question. I actually had a question about miracles and technology, but I also had another question about joining the Austin Atheist Community also. But
I can't answer the second one.
okay.
Because of rules of the TV show.
Yeah.
But you can check out our website and get
Okay.
information there.
All right, I appreciate it.
So let's go with the miracle question.
Okay, so there's a quote by I think he's either a scientist or
He's a science
maybe
fiction writer, Arthur C. Clarke.
Okay, and what did he say about? I actually heard it discussed first on this show.
Yeah.
And
Sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, I believe, is the something. That's the gist of it, anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a tomato thing.
Well, what it means is that if you are unfamiliar with a particular technology, if it is so far beyond your comprehension that you are in a position where that technology is indistinguishable from magic, you have no way to comprehend it. And so if somebody took a cell phone back to the Dark Ages, granted there'd be no tower for anybody to call, but if you still had power and you could pull up whatever game you were playing and piddle around on it and touch and do stuff like that, to them it would appear to be magic because they are missing so many steps in the foundation of understanding that technology that it to them is magic.
But in principle, something like that in principle could be understood by a human brain.
Sure, and what kind of touches on what Don was talking about. If we hadn't lost the library at Alexandria and other things, that we might have had integral calculus, a millennia earlier, and how much further along would we be? And so I don't think that that in this short period of time, let's say 2,000 years, that our brains have evolved dramatically. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't go back in time, if it's possible, and teach first century people how to do about the technologies that we now understand.
Well, I think the first time I heard it, I kind of just jumped to the conclusion of imagining some other type of alien species. And so I guess what kind of made it stick in my head was if the species is so much more advanced than us that, it's the difference between, say, us and some kind of a monkey maybe, then if we can't understand the technology, if our minds are not capable of understanding it, then that's kind of creates a very, kind of opens up a really big hole in the sense that how can you say that something is not supernatural if you can't grasp the aspect of it?
The burden of proof is on somebody claiming something is supernatural to prove that it is.
Sure, absolutely. But I think what I'm saying is that if you're dealing with an alien species who you can't even grasp their thinking and their perspective, then the technology itself, if it can't in principle even be understood by a human brain, then it seems to have created
we're sort of there now, right? In the sense that there's lots of areas of science where there's mysteries and unsolved problems and things that we just can't explain. And the right answer is we don't know, or we're looking into it, or we're trying to figure it out. That's the right answer.
The right answer doesn't become, it's supernatural, until you can actually demonstrate a supernatural cause, which, by the way, you can't.
Right, but would that, at that point, is it really appropriate to say that there's no difference between that and a miracle? Because that seems like it's not a miracle.
So a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. It would certainly be the case that people who don't understand it might perceive it as a miracle and may even label it as a miracle, but they would in fact be wrong.
So what about in these scenarios people create of simulations? In other words, if it's some kind of a simulation like a computer game and you're violating, like a programmer can violate the kind of the physics laws of the simulation. So in that sense, he's kind of violating. It's kind of not natural. It's violating the physics of the game. But at the same time, it's taking the whole picture in. It's not irrational.
I don't know what you're asking.
Well, I think he's talking about like Easter eggs in games where you can jump to the next level and these sorts of...
Well, yeah, well, I'm saying like if you take like a Matrix type reality, in other words, there's a physics to the way it works normally. But you could go in and you could change...
Yeah, I understood that part. I don't know what your question is.
My question is, would that, if the game world, universe has a physics to it, and you're able to violate those, then is that supernatural?
Sure.
From the perspective of inside the game, sure.
Exactly, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying.
But you'd have no way of actually demonstrating that.
Right. Okay, and I found a way to ask my other question without getting into the other. I can ask it in a more basic way. The thing is that my experience with religion has been that as far as the people in my family know, I'm an atheist because it's just easier that way because they're not interested in the more nuanced philosophical aspects anyway.
Okay.
And I'm also I like what you guys do. I'm one of the people who's always posting and liking the atheist posts because of all the good points they make and stuff. But when it comes to I get really hung up on some of the more philosophical definitions of God, so that I find myself kind of when I'm asked to just conclusively say that there's not a God.
Why would you ever do that?
Excuse me?
Why would you do that? So
first, why would I do what?
Conclusively say that there is no God. Have you concluded this?
No, or to put it another way, if somebody were to ask me, do you believe that there's a God, I have to say that I kind of, a lot, especially on some of these certain philosophical definitions of it, it's the furthest thing from any kind of a God that I would know through religion, really,
right.
Or any kind of a, but I still feel kind of like
you're on the right track.
Say yes.
You're on the right track in the sense that, your next question should be define what you mean by God, right? And if it's some sort of esoteric definition, then it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know. Give me a demonstration of this God. I'm interested. It's also perfectly okay to say this has nothing to do with the religion I grew up with or know anything about. Why are you bringing up this obscure thing?
It's not up to you.
Nobody's bringing it up to me. This is from my own investigating it, and
right.
I got into the whole Spinoza thing because people always bring up Spinoza and Einstein, and
sure.
And I looked
There's
at
about as many definitions of God as there are people. So
sure. And when I looked at it, and some of the ones that I look at, especially the ones that kind of seem to be more likely you're going to find in a Western kind of philosophical or scientific setting, those kind of, sometimes they leave me with a little sense that there's actually something solid there.
Well, of course there's something solid there. When Spinoza and others define a God of the universe, or they define God as being synonymous with the universe, the solid thing that's there is the universe. The problem is that they have no good reason for applying the God label to it.
Well, but Spinoza wasn't a materialist, though, and for me, that's the main way I understand everything is by materialism.
Right, scientific materialism.
And so people, when I came across Spinoza and Bertrand Russell talking about, that they weren't really materialists, but there was this reality, the substance reality had both the mental and the physical aspect. I just thought, this is kind of just blowing everything wide open.
I don't know what you mean that's blowing it. I apologize, but I'm having a real difficult time understanding what your actual problem is, because first of all, it's not up to you to define a God and then refute it, because that path lies straw man.
Sure.
But the other thing is that there's apart from gods that are logically inconsistent, they're logically contradictory, you couldn't claim that there is no God. It's just a matter of not believing it. And so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Spinoza's God or the Christian God or some tiki god somewhere, whatever. the burden of proof is on them to demonstrate that it exists. And when somebody talks to you about why you don't believe, you're not in a position where you're asserting that their God is necessarily false. You are in a position of saying, I am not yet convinced that it's true. And that's all that's required.
Well, when I'm in a position to maybe I'm in a situation where you've got to kind of say, to be part of something, you've got to say essentially, I don't believe in God. I definitely don't believe in any kind of God. I don't know if I could honestly do that at this point.
Well, that's fine. That's perfectly honest, and there's nothing wrong with that.
But I don't know what the problem is with saying that at all. Do you believe in some God?
I honestly think that there is.
What kind of God do you believe in?
Well, okay, I mean, that there's, first of all, the idea of, I'm not saying, let me be quick that I'm not saying that any of these are, I'm not standing on any of these arguments or saying I think these are seamless mathematical theorems.
You just said that you think you believe in a God. All I want to know is what God do you believe in and why?
The God that is, I guess, like the ground of being or the prime mover, kind of that kind of thing.
Why?
I think it's sometimes it's hard to tell what is the when I look into it. Like I said, I always come out of it thinking, yeah, this kind of sounds. I think I believe this, but it's kind of hard, like to say exactly point for point what are the exact reasons why. I mean, maybe something kind of almost intuitive about it, but I don't I don't lead with that.
So it's compelling at some level to you.
Excuse me?
It's compelling at some level.
Sure.
What's compelling?
The prime mover, the first cause.
The idea that there's I think the word Spinoza used was like the underlying the thing that stands beneath or something.
What on earth makes you think there's a thing that stands beneath? Because to me that phrase is a deepity.
Well, I mean that there's something. In other words, that there's aspects of whether it's first we kind of held that. Before they saw that the universe had an age, it was kind of like, I guess, maybe matter and energy were eternal and they were always there. And now, maybe that's not the case, but maybe there's certain principles or rules
that's a whole lot of maybes.
Excuse me?
That's a whole lot of maybes. I'm trying to get to
well,
actually...
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't get into it. I don't go too far with that's like the thing of, are we living in is this reality real, or is it going to stop all of a sudden?
It seems to me that you are willingly falling prey to shifting the burden of proof. You're basically seem to be implying that, we really don't know, and there could be something like this, and maybe it's like this. That's not the foundation upon which we should believe something.
Right.
There's a difference between not believing that something is impossible and believing that it's possible, and there's a difference between believing something is possible and believing that it's actually true. And so when I say, do you believe in a God, and you say, well, yeah, kind of, I don't even know what that means.
Okay, well, for instance, if you've got you're trying to decide murder, and they've got the two suspects there, and you got this strong feeling about one of them, and you even after you hear all the arguments, you see the thrust of them, and that they kind of maybe lead to the direction of this is not the guy. But just out of honesty, just sheer honesty, at the end of the day, and that's how I often felt about atheism. When the Christians would get me into all this stuff about but what about this? What about that? And
we're getting off track.
Before I had the answers to those things, I would just say, I'm sorry. I don't have all the answers, but I think you guys are wrong. I don't believe Jesus is who you say he is, and no, I can't prove it, but I just. My gut tells me that it's just not.
Let's go to your murder example, because I got other callers and we're getting way off track.
Go for it.
Let's go to your murder example. You've got two suspects. Are you convinced that one of them is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
No, not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Then you have to vote not guilty, which means you don't believe.
No. It means that you may believe, but there is a doubt. In other words.
I'm talking about making the decision on whether or not you are convinced that the person is guilty. And that's what I mean by, are you convinced beyond a reasonable doubt?
Well, I think that it's like, is my brother across town getting ready for dinner? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is, because he always is at this time of day. Is there a reasonable doubt? Sure. There's a huge doubt. but my gut says he most likely is.
Okay.
So on that basis, yeah, I kind of think that there's a God thing.
What is the evidence that has convinced you to whatever degree?
The reoccurrence of the thing over and over again.
The reoccurrence of what thing over and over again? That sentence was devoid of content.
The reoccurrence of this God idea thing that is that comes before our reality and is preeminent.
So there's a reoccurrence of ideas of alien visitors and Bigfoot. Does that mean it's reasonable to believe that?
Well, I don't think that alien visitors and Bigfoot are reoccurrent so much throughout history. And also, I think that it's weird the way the God thing persists into science.
So is it more reasonable that people have come up with this God as a gap filler to things that we don't understand through an error in reasoning, or that it's actually true?
I would think that it's actually true.
Why?
We have the rules of logic and everything now, and even people like Gödel and those Gödel believed in God. And
I'm sorry, this is starting to sound like you tossing out as many things that sound significant as you can come up with, and making no actual case.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if it adds up to a case or not, but enough people when all the people kind of add together, it starts to get, Hey, the bigger question.
So you think that it's a reliable mechanism to truth, to determine beliefs, is to figure out how many people have repeatedly come up with a particular idea, like let's say that the Earth is flat, which was something that virtually everybody believed right up until the time it was proved wrong, and it was.
That's not really when.
Go read a
when
book.
Was it?
Yeah. All right.
Well, let me say something more constructive.
Sure.
There's a lot to be gained, I think, from learning about logical fallacies and practicing them in your thinking and reading and critical thought. That's made me smarter doing that, and you're less likely to be conned and these sorts of things, and that's good stuff. And I detect some whiffs of logical fallacies in there, and I think that if you're more comfortable with that knowledge and more confident of those things, then you could throw away a lot of these arguments. And
I did
not
throw
be
away
persuaded.
a lot of those arguments.
No,
because
I'm talking to the caller.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the reason that there's frustration here is because, to me, in my head, and I could be wrong, the entire summation of that call is, I think maybe I kind of might believe, and maybe I do believe.
He's sitting on the fence.
And it's because of this, and I really don't know why that should be a good reason to believe, and I'm not sure that there is a good reason to believe, but I kind of believe this.
He just needs to crisp up his thinking a bit. So
it's so one of the things is that if you say you believe something, that is a statement that you are convinced that the claim is true or likely true. Right. I mean, that is an expression that you are convinced of this, and you become convinced for good or bad reasons. And the reason that we ask what you believe and why is because we want to get down to, do you have really good reasons for believing something? Because if so, we'd like to be able to join you in believing for good reasons.
There you go.
And if you have bad reasons, or you can't express reasons, or you can't even really, put into words what it is that you believe, and even worse, you can't really express why.
Yeah, well, he's been taken in a little bit by the bad reasons, I think, and needs to understand why they're bad reasons.
Well, one of the things that we kind of have come to understand is that we are fallible thinking machines that are pattern recognizing machines that live our lives by inference and induction, and we make mistakes. Yep. And the fact that somebody has repeatedly come up with the idea that there must be a God, I see no reason to think that that's anything more than a repeated mistake, because we still haven't solved the biggest questions of the universe. Why is there something other than nothing? And it's potentially comforting to appeal to this universal grounding.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that it's reasonable to believe. It doesn't mean it's true. And when you start appealing to, so many people have come up with this idea over and over again.
I don't think that was the only reason he had, but it was certainly among the bad ones.